Here to come. Swarming the room.
He's not around.
Hi there, everyone. Welcome to day 2 of the ACAC convening. If y'all wouldn't mind to mute your microphones, that would be fantastic, just to cut back on background noise. Thank you. I am really, really thrilled to have our 2 presenters with us today. They're going to lead us through a topic that I think is really critical as we think about the work that we do in the context of a pandemic. In early April, I was on a phone call with Laura and a bunch of folks from various national organizations. Reach Higher was there, NCAN, ACAC, ACRO, ASCA, all sorts of folks. And we were all talking about, the resources that we are making available in the COVID-19 crisis, policies that are changing, deadlines that are being adjusted, all things that are obviously important that we get in the hands of students and families who we know are navigating uncharted territory. Many of whom are finding themselves in new and unexpected, challenging financial situations. And as we sort of went around the virtual table and Laura spoke, I think we all kind of stopped in our tracks a bit because she spoke about the stress and the grief and the trauma that COVID-19 was creating or exacerbating in the lives of our students, especially our most vulnerable students who we aim to serve through ACAC. With the added complexity of helping students navigate this in a time of social distancing and school closure. So we are grateful to Laura and Kara who are going to walk us through these concepts, how these challenges may impact students as they're navigating the college-going process, making decisions, and the roles and resources that we collectively at ACAC can help get into the hands of schools and students and families to help them make the best, most informed decisions. So let me do sort of a formal introduction of Kara and Laura, and then I will hand it over to them. If you have questions, same deal as yesterday, please use the group chat or the raise your hand feature, and we will be happy to answer those after Laura and Kara walk through their PowerPoint. So Dr. Kara Aiva is currently an associate professor in the Counseling Educational Settings program at Rowan University. In addition to her current position in counselor education, her educational career spans over 20 years as a former Spanish teacher, administrator, professional school counselor, and counseling supervisor. Kara's areas of research interest include promoting equity in education and counseling for children and adolescents of underserved populations in the specific areas of college and career access, social emotional development, and group counseling and supervision. She provides professional development to pre-K through 20 school counselors, teachers, and administrators on how to embed social emotional development into curricula and strategies for cultivating a safe and welcoming mental health and neurodiverse culture in schools. Dr. Laura Owen, a research associate professor and director of the Center for Postsecondary Readiness and Success, focuses on evaluating the impact of interventions and programs designed to address the persistent equity and access issues that so many students across the country face. A prior urban school counselor and district school counseling professor, she is a passionate advocate for closing post-secondary opportunity gaps. Dr. Owen co-led the SDSU White House Convening and assisted with the AU White House Convening Connecting the Dots, which supported the former First Lady Michelle Obama's Reach Higher campaign, focused on increasing equitable and accessible pathways to post-secondary success for all students, especially those who face formidable barriers. Dr. Owen is a co-author of the Revisiting the Path Forward report in partial response to recommendations made in the Revisiting the Path Forward report American University launched the Center for Postsecondary Readiness and Success in January 2018, and they've been wonderful partners of ACAC and the Steps to College initiative. So let me hand it over to Kara and Laura. Thank you both for joining us today.
Great. So welcome everybody. We're happy to be here today, and more specifically to Laura for inviting us during this process. We have really been working side by side kind of through this process and navigating it, I think, ourselves together. And just kind of a few housekeeping items. There we go. Woohoo! So you are all here on your own accord, and one of the things I like to do in all of my workshops or professional development is to generalize, I'm a group person, some assumptions. And one of them is that you are obviously here for all the students that you serve, and that you are also attempting to maintain your own wellness. We know that our buckets really have to be full in order to help others. And then that we'll continue to learn to be able to meet the needs of the people that we serve. And so I kind of sum that up as we care, self-care, and educare. And having said that, we are in what we would call, this is what we hear over and over, challenging times, unprecedented times, and things of that nature. So one of the things that we're gonna do is we're gonna take a quick little survey. I'll show you how to do that. We are gonna present to you, and then we are really gonna open up for a question and answer kind of time period, so that we make sure we meet your needs as well, in case they're not here. So I'm gonna stop sharing and going to our other. That's the PowerPoint. There we go. So if you can go to menti.com and use this code, we have a few questions for you to answer. We're going to go through it, and then we will show you kind of the live results. So if you can go to menti.com, it looks like this. You can use your phone, you can use the computer, and you can type in this code. And the first question asks, how are you coping with the pandemic? And it really is a rating scale. So I'll give you a couple of seconds to do that before moving on. The next is, have you been able to find a work-life balance? Again, if we go back to your care is just as critical for the needs for the people that you work with. If you had a word or phrase that you might use to describe your mental health, I can tell you every time I fill something in this out, I use the word roller coaster. So not to want to take that from anyone. And then our next couple questions are really about the work that you're doing professionally. I can't see what this one says, but I can tell you that it's on your question, but it has something to do with the students at your work. Oh, I know. Do you feel equipped, right, to work with your students during COVID?
It's how equipped do you feel to advise students during COVID-19?
Yes. Thank you. Which will also actually be the same for this next question. So this does ask you, you can pick more than one, but it asks you to rank of what you're really seeing with your students. I forgot, I got rid of the question. It's just in the statements. And I think there is one more. Sorry. For students expressing concerns about making the final post-secondary decision, what is the #1 reason they indicate? And again, if you want to put more than one, you are able to do that. It's more of a ranking. And I am going to come back to this and show you results. And then the last question, for students who have indicated a change of plans for fall 2020, what are you seeing most frequently? And because we know that people would like to see the results, we are going to go back and show those to you before we get started. So people seem to be on an uphill swing as far as how they're doing personally and academically. Wow, 77%. I say this in a wow, so not in judgment, more that I work with a lot of the school counselors in the state of New Jersey, and it's one of the things that they are struggling with. So 72%, that's good. This is our word cloud. You can see some of those words. Someone did write roller coaster. Thank you for writing that for me. And we have some who are positive. So we run the gamut right here, but I think we kind of know that based on our previous scale. For this one, we're right in the middle of how feeling equipped or not. Hopefully we're going to give you some information that you will have to contend with. I can't say that we're going to give you all the answers. I want to be clear about that. Next, what percentage of your students have indicated a change? That's less than half. And just based on the stats that Laura was talking about previously, that actually seems a little higher than I would have imagined at this point. So that's good to know. And what percentage? Oh, this is the same one. Sorry. Come on. There we go. Number one being financial. I would imagine that that is pretty common with what's happening across the country. And fear of the unknown also. You're not sure how to make that decision. And then waiting to see what happens in the next coming months. And right, so that really does put a lot of people in this unknown spot, both at the college level, both at your level, and really how do we move forward with that? So with that being said, that was the last question, right, Laura? Yeah, okay. Let me go back to our PowerPoint. There we go. All right. Thank you for taking the time to take that. And it does give us a sense of kind of where we are. So before we begin, I do want to give you this reminder that you do work and change people's lives. And so really be kind to yourself during this time period, and that your self-care is critical. With 77 or 73% of you feeling like you've reached work-life balance, I would just encourage that particular piece. And please remember that you are enough. No one has been through this before, and so no one really knows how to navigate, and everyone's doing the best that we potentially can. So what I'm going to talk about a little is what I'm going to call pre-pandemic statistics. We had a mental health crisis and students experiencing trauma way before the coronavirus happened. So in the last decade, suicide went from the third leading cause to the second leading cause for our students between 10 and 24 years old. And it's really increased from a percentage perspective. And I say this to say that 1 in 5 children across this country who are the age 13 to 18 have a mental health diagnosis. And I'm saying this because those are students who are diagnosed and had access to mental health care. That statistic is actually probably a lot higher, but obviously access is an issue in our country. I want to add about LGBT and any other factors that then influence this for students. LGBT teens are 6 times more likely to have symptoms of depression. Our homeless youth has increased 6 times in the last year, not in the last decade, in the last year from a mental health perspective. And for any child who has any neurological disorder, so autism, ADHD, Tourette's, a long list of what we call invisible disabilities, 83% of all of those students are likely to have a comorbid diagnosis and multiple comorbid diagnoses, but one of them happens to be related to mental health. And now we have students who are at home, whether they had previous mental health or not. We have a lot of students, and we've been hearing this from a lot of our high school counselors around the country, not just the state, that a lot of their high school students are now essential care workers and are the ones who are carrying the financial burden for potentially their homes. There could have been a role reversal there, and that's really important to what's happening at the K-12 level now as far as juniors and seniors are concerned. We have a lot who are really social justice and action-oriented people, and so they're contributing in a lot of ways. And in a lot of ways, like making masks or putting up the rainbows or rocks, they feel connected to a movement, and those are kind of students that are still somewhat feeling connected to be able to go to college even in that level of uncertainty. We have some who are hyper-focused on academics as a coping skill, and you can think about this for yourself. I'm sure some of you are cleaners, right? Task-oriented things that you can focus on when you're dealing with your mental health. And then when we have others who just have no interest, and we're hearing that a lot, right? How do we get students to get motivated and be able to make decisions? I'm going to explain to you in a little bit about why they can't make that decision. We have some that are not able to get fresh air just based on where they live, and then any other medical complication on top of that. And we also have a lot who still aren't fed and are still trying to figure out from a day-to-day basis. Even though schools are giving food on a bi-weekly basis for both students and families, we still have a large portion of phone calls that we get in for people who aren't able to have access to food. And then we have the anxiety ridden with the parents and family members who are essential workers. We've seen a lot of in our area. I'm in New Jersey. A lot of parents actually self-isolate from their kids. And so we actually have a lot that may not have a structure or supervision as a result of trying to keep them healthy and safe. And we know this to be true in our state, that child abuse is on the rise. The reporting to our Department of Child and Families is at a low, as you can imagine, because our school isn't necessarily the ones who are contacting, but the police are getting a lot more of an increase as far as child abuse and substance abuse. And we're actually getting a lot as far as withdrawal is concerned. And then I know all of you are experiencing this at the same time. There are multiple stages to grief and loss. We've seen with our seniors that a lot have, lost their rites of passage and milestones and graduations and proms and dances. We've seen a lot who have had access to friends. And for some, that's a great thing. And for others, those who I would call a capital E, and extroverted, who need that or who need that constant feedback. We are talking about a generation that grew up on social media, and they are used to connecting with their friends on social media, but school was the outlet to be able to, by which to really engage with them. We have a lot of people who are who have lost access to safety and security. As you know, school was one of those places and structures that at least a child knew they were getting 2 meals a day. There was a safety in that routine. There was a safety in that structure. And there was at least one person in that building that cared about them, whether it was a teacher or a friend. And that becomes an instrumental loss for some. So loss of comfort, the loss of control. I would say this is all of us that are feeling. You don't really know what you have control anymore, other than not even whether or not you can leave your house and go somewhere, particularly if you're an essential care worker. And I've already mentioned that predictability is gone for others. And loss of checking in. We've seen a lot of increase in questions in counseling in particular about how to help someone who you can't go check in on, who also might be depressed or have anxiety. And so by the nature of the work that you do, you potentially are in that realm as well. We have, if you think about developmental stages, right? We all go through this developmental stage of somewhat risk-taking, right? Someone being able to be a little, what I'll call defiant. And we've taken that away from teenagers, and teenagers see that as a loss of freedom. And so if they don't understand what's happening, they also feel trapped and feel like they're suffocating simultaneously. And then because of that, there's also a loss of identity development, right? As just saying I'm a high school junior, I'm a high school senior is some form of an identity, and not having to be able to have those rites of passage and milestones are just causing a lot more grief and anxiety. And if you don't know about grief and loss, we know that there's stages and that it's fluid and that it can go up and down. And so people can be angry one day and accept it another day, and then the next day go back. And so there's no continuity in this process. And while we have so much uncertainty, that moving through that continuum of grief and loss is going to continue as we move through this. And all that to say is that the overall pandemic is causing serious trauma to everyone, whether they are exposing signs right now or in the future. And so we are equating this to what we call adverse childhood experiences. And I'm going to explain a little. I'm not sure how many people on the call know about adverse childhood experiences. It has been something that has been around and has been revised, which I'll talk about. But ultimately, they have what, if a child experiences this and doesn't necessarily get interventions in place and protective factors, it equals to what we call trauma brain. And part of what is happening for everyone is, and you might understand this for yourself, you can't believe that we've been in lockdown for over 2 months. You're not sure where time has gone, right? There wasn't like, even if you have a schedule within your household, it just feels like it was days ago, weeks ago, or you can't even remember what happened yesterday, right? For us, we see levels of this just as fog, but for others, this is something that gets really amplified. And so we wanted to share a couple pictures with you. Laura, you want to talk about this picture? No.
Sure. I just
Yeah.
needed to unmute myself there. This is actually a photo that a school counselor shared, and she actually described many things that were going on in her day, one of which was receiving a copy of this photo and trying to respond through an app with the family. And so I think if you read this and you see, I believe she's a third grader, if you read this, go away, never come back, you scare me, I want you gone, you make me worry, I don't like you, you're mean, you're the worst, I hate you, never come by me again, never come in my head again. And she's drawn a photo of what she thinks the coronavirus looks like. Mm-hmm. And I think that this is just a good indicator of what some children are holding on to. I saw a video last night of a 2-year-old who was talking about the virus in a way that you just can see all of this trauma from what they're hearing and how they're internalizing it. And parents are trying to help their kids, but I think parents are traumatized as well and experiencing anxiety. And some of this will be hidden. Not every child is going to be able to even put words to it, but they're having reactions to it. And I think our teens are the same, and many adults are the same way. So we just wanted to kind of illustrate for you what our counselors are seeing. And there's a lot more than this, but I think this was a good way to show how a young child may just be internalizing this. And you could tell the fear and the trauma from this young girl.
Mm-hmm. I have 2 children who are young, who are diagnosed both with general anxiety disorder. And I can tell you those thoughts don't stop. One's able to verbalize, and the other, like this, is able to creatively put it in a different space to let us know. But they're showing signs now. We have a lot of children and teens in the future who are not going to show signs until this is after. And I think that that's what we're trying to stress here. Just so this is from a teacher. I'm just going to point some highlights. In one particular day, she intervened and had to get assistance for 2 students for preventing suicides. One got out of the hospital for attempted suicide. One was recently sent to a new foster home. 2 were feeling depressed. Then there's those with backed out of class with technology, those who can't sleep. And so this is real, this is rampant, and I'm not sure how much of all of this that gets broadcasted, because again, these are minors, so it's not something that people are willingly sharing to let know that's happening. And this is also coming from someone who's listening to school counselors on a daily basis about the students that they're working with. And so it is a lot more prevalent than I think that's being advertised. So adverse childhood experiences this is a good visual to show you. This is what they used to consider things that cause trauma, right? Physical abuse, neglect, those that suffer from mental health within a household, sexual abuse, divorce, things that you would automatically assume that would cause trauma for some of our students. And what we've learned through research over time is that it increases risk-taking behaviors, it increases long-standing health issues, and then ultimately an early death. So if we're saying that COVID in and of itself is a form of an adverse childhood experience, then there are multiple factors that are at play here. In here, there is a video embedded for those who have never heard of adverse childhood experiences. It's a great visual to understand that, but it affects the brain in so many ways. And you can see here that it affects brain development, behavior, cognition, mental health, physical health, which ultimately leads to that early death they talk about, emotional and relationships, and being able to regulate emotions in and out of school and also in relationships. And then the mental health side of that is something that can be immediate or can't be recognized and then shows signs long term. So Lauren, I've shared this common thought that post getting through this, whatever that looks like, we still have another mental health pandemic on our side because there's many facets that we just won't be able to tell until later on in time. I'm showing you this because there's a lot of scrutiny about adverse childhood reactions and trauma in of itself. And I just I want to point this out that race, right, ethnicity, socioeconomic status, all of those things really have a factor to play here. And as you've seen across this country, as far as COVID's concerned, it really truly is at play. And so to keep in mind for those of you who are working with students of color and students who potentially might be first generation students or students who are really in low-income areas, that trauma is really felt more magnified. And there's a lot of research, obviously, to be able to back that up. We do want to talk about some of the ways that will show up for you when working with students and also in classes. Anger is one piece of it. You know, we always talk about, where does anger come from? Well, right now, a lot of anger is coming from some of the trauma and people feeling anxious and depressed. Sleeping is one of them. And you might experience this with some of you who have kids in your home. Defiance, not wanting to do anything and making a stand and not feeling like there's a consequence anymore, whereas maybe before that might have been different. The lack of focus. I can tell you that I think I personally have a lack of focus in relation to some of the anxiety that goes on. And so it's real. It's not something that we are immune to as humans and individuals.
Can I jump in?
Yeah.
So the way that I knew I was experiencing more anxiety than I thought was it really disrupted my sleep. And I couldn't go to sleep till really late. I would wake up really early, sometimes startled, waking up, or I would wake up in the morning and couldn't quite remember what was going on early on, but I had this, impending sense of something was really wrong. And so that for me was a real cue that, okay, I'm experiencing anxiety that I didn't even realize because it totally changed my sleeping patterns. And I had to back off of news and find some other ways to cope with that. I started listening to the Calm app every single night before I would go to sleep, just finding ways to be able to balance that, because in trying to support school counselors and hearing all of the things that they are dealing with, which are quite extensive, and I'm sure a lot of you on the call could tell us a lot of things you're hearing from your students and your families. I think that sort of vicarious trauma was sitting in a place that was heavy for me. And another thing, just another reminder that self-care is so important, because you are the helpers. You are the ones who are on the front lines, who are hearing many things from your families and students, not just about going to college or their post-secondary plans, but really what's going on in their life. And so I think, you look at these signs for our students, but they're also for us too.
Yeah, without a doubt. And I think, along those lines, Laura, mine also was, I can't believe it takes me this long to do all these tasks, right? Like it never used to take me this long to do all of these things. And that was a sign for me that I also needed to pay attention. Now, I will say planning is not a bad thing, but a lot of us over plan and this is more about control and how people can't handle the control of anxiety, so they try to control other aspects. And that could also play out in planning for college as well, and you might be able to see that. The negativity, I think it's hard not to be negative at times. We talked about, me personally, it being a roller coaster. And then chandeliering, and you probably have seen this as parents, and we've seen an increase in parents saying, whoa, my child never used to act like this, but to go from 0 to 60 in less than, they couldn't reach the cereal or something of that nature. And while it just seems so insignificant at the time, those are telling signs as far as anxiety is concerned, and that really what you're talking about, the vicarious trauma. I also put this visual up here, not because, obviously to highlight what people think about and what they worry about, but more so the positive redirection that is specifically here in this visual, right? What if I get sick? The positives, we can take all of the steps. And I think my favorite one on here is what will happen in a few weeks, because, that is a common question, doesn't matter how old you are. And the redirect on that was, we can focus on what we can do present right now and still having a future plan, because fixation is something else that will come out of this. If you can fixate and only focus on one particular thing, then nothing else around you matters. And so for some, the college planning aspect might be something that they fixate on, and it's not necessarily a bad thing until it doesn't meet expectations and they don't get the information they need in a timely manner. That can also can further complicate what they potentially are feeling. If you think about this, because you're all in this position now, and I would use this example differently if we weren't in this situation, but I'm sure there's probably half of you in here who watch TV, and that you pick up your phone and you do all these other things, right? You're no longer just hyper-focused on what I'll call binge watching or watching TV. And what's happening is all of our brains are now being wired to be put on, that we're on all the time, that we almost can't handle it when we're not on. It actually feels abnormal. And we call that also trauma brain, when your brain is completely wired to be on. And what happens when you're having trauma brain is that we tend to lose what we call executive functioning skills, which I'll explain. But for the most part, we've only ever talked about executive functioning skills globally for those who were diagnosed with ADHD, who might be on the spectrum, but it actually also presents for those who are experiencing trauma and anxiety. And so we talk about being in a classroom of 20, and 16 of those students are diagnosed with one of those things. And so only 4 students in a class potentially are fully what we call executive functioning. And that's the hard part. And these are broken down into different steps. And the reason I'm mentioning it here is because most of the skill sets embedded in executive functioning are really the skills that students need to have in order to work with you as they work through these plans. And because they might be experiencing anxiety, and because they might be in trauma, then it's also really hard to be able to to go through these motions. And one, first and foremost, is task initiation. I joke about this, but it's not really a joke anymore, that people have gotten divorced over this. How could you not do this? I've set it up. I've put plans in place. I've color coded this. All you have to do is get up out of this chair and go over there and start, right? Well, task initiation is actually one of those things that can get clouded, and that can be, from a judgment perspective. And people it's like being depressed. They just can't necessarily get up to be able to do that. So we can do all these reminders and send all these notes, but sometimes that is what gets impaired. And then the next part about this is planning and prioritizing. It's really hard to plan and prioritize in this world right now in general, just because of the uncertainty. It's even further if you're anxious about so many things. There is not one thought that is actually that you're able to think clearly. And so if you can't think clearly, planning and going through a step-by-step and figuring out how to prioritize. And I'm going to tell you, for me, that's cleaning. Like, I want to clean. I don't even know where to start sometimes. And because I can't do it in the time frame I want to get the expectations I want, I won't engage in it because I just can't figure out where to go. And so I'm using that as an example, but people are making life-altering decisions right now under uncertain times, and we want to assist in that planning and prioritizing, but it doesn't mean the person that you're working with has the capability to be able to do that. Working memory is also one of those things. So you could work with someone and, leave the conversation and you can replay it in your head. They've walked away and have compartmentalized that they've even met with you and they have now moved on. And so even if you ask them to do a task or things of that nature, asking them to remember, they actually aren't capable of being able to do that. It's one of the reasons why we've always encouraged writing things down things of that nature. But I can say, for me, that's the first to go when I'm in a situation like this. Flexible thinking, really being able to see outside the box. Well, if I do this, then I can also do this. It's not something that comes easy anymore. And particularly for those of your students that you're working with who are really embedded and focused on what they wanted their major to be. And although this one school makes more sense financially, but doesn't offer the same kind of major in the way that they intended it to be, like they can't see past that with all of those decisions. It's still going to be, I want this major and nothing else matters. And so flexible thinking is something that really gets cut off. And then you can see emotional control, impulse control, and even kind of tracking things organizationally. We don't talk about this being a loss for students who are experiencing anxiety and or depression, and in this particular case could be an aspect that's further traumatizing for them. So what's that all mean to you? It means that all of your students are still constantly on and are on high alert, and they could be lacking in some of those skills, right? We also didn't mention this, but a lot of our students, particularly if they're not sure about their safety or food or what's happening from an uncertainty, they're in survival mode. And being in survival mode has you either, right, fight or flight. And when you're flighting, all of those things I just previously discussed about executive functioning has gone to the wayside. And so if you are working with students who are in a survival mode, it's really hard to then also try to motivate them and try to work them through the steps of planning organization. And we're not saying don't try, we're just saying to recognize that it's going to be more of a developmental process than it might have been previously in the past. I pretty much talked about all these things. We are concerned about coping skills globally because coping skills is not something that anyone's really addressing with students, right? Right now, it was the quick shift to virtual online. We do have a lot of school counseling programs that are up and running virtually as well. But we know that when you are feeling anxious or depressed, or you are experiencing some sort of level of trauma, you default to your original coping skills that you have. So if they were negative coping skills to begin with, and one of them is what I'm going to call faulty thinking. They tell themselves negative thoughts, or they believe or perceive something in one particular way. But if they're not processing and having that dialogue and conversation, then it gets set in stone. And so depending on what coping skills your students had already had as far as resiliency and moving forward, that could also be kind of a determining factor for how you're working with your students right now. And all of this to say that there are going to be immediate and then there are going to be long-term effects, both mentally, physically, and really how students behave as we move forward. And there is no one size answer or solution that kind of fits this. But I do want to say this, because I think based on some of the surveys that we had, we have two really types of students right now. We have those that are surviving, kind of similar to what we're talking about, and these are their feelings, right? They're stressed, scared, anxious, sad, lonely and isolated, and depressed. And we talked about could be suffocating in a one-bedroom apartment with a family of 5 or 6 with no space to call their own, right? And then we have a whole nother set of students who actually, some of them in a brick and mortar situation would be in survival mode, but because they're at home, they are thriving. And a lot of that is our students who are already diagnosed with some sort of level of anxiety, particularly those with social anxiety or medical diagnoses that they were always worried about. You know, I tell stories about kids who have allergies who freak out when someone's eating something on the bus that they don't understand and they don't know how to explain that. And so we really do, I want to be clear that there are a lot of students who are doing exceptionally well. Most of those students do tend to fall from a lower a higher socioeconomic status. However, there is a large group of students who, like I said, have already been medically and or clinically diagnosed with other things who are doing well, because the only thing they have to focus on is school, and they don't have to hyper focus on all of those other things that cause them anxiety beforehand. I'm just gonna say this is here, but there are a lot of protective factors. You essentially are a part of a major protective factor for students. So the work that you do, I want to be clear, is really important for these students because they need you probably now more than they've ever needed you. And they're going to gravitate to people who are going to be able to assist and help them. And so anything that you can do to build on some of these things for your students, yeah. I'm just going to leave this here. I will say non-traditional access to mental health. You right now are what we call a first responder also in working with students. And so being a first responder, obviously the reason why we're talking about self-care is it has this emotional toll on you, but you are also someone now who might be triaging and sending them to other resources that they can get in ways in which you are just about probably post-secondary planning moving forward, but you might be the difference between them getting access also to food and to other access to mental health. And so if it wasn't a part of what you've done before, making sure that you know what that access is in the areas for the students that you are working with can be, or even to the school counselors too, can be very critical as you move forward. So at the heart, as long as they are seen, valued, and heard, we have a starting point for them moving forward. And you, as someone who works with them and sets up either systems or mentorships or counseling with them, you are able to engage and help them move forward. Just know that these are some of the things that you're combating. And you might not have been able to name it previously, but now you can understand what that is. And so, Laura, I'm going to let you take over.
Thanks, Kara. If you want to go to the next slide.
Yeah.
Oh, wait a minute. These were
mine.
yours.
Yes, but I want to make sure we have time.
Yeah,
so.
no, that's fine. Go ahead to the next one. So one of the things, thank you, Kara, and I wanted to let everyone know, because she didn't put this in her intro, and so I'm going to share it. Kara actually has coordinated and instigated a statewide response in the state of New Jersey to the pandemic, and has coordinated an incredible number of support groups for counselors, teachers, administrators, and just done a phenomenal job. And so it's a gift and a pleasure to present with her today. She and I have been working on this, talking about how we could respond and support the staff that we know who are on the front line. And so we're going to play a video for you here, because I think it really touches on where a lot of our students are right now.
I'm working on it. Is embedded?
It was embedded. You know what? I'll send the link after, because it looks like you had to select a button when you opened the PowerPoint for it to be there. It said to select media, but that's okay. I'll send you. I'll send you all the link.
Because I could do this. No.
What can we do?
Yeah, it's not there.
It's okay. It's okay. Just go ahead and I'll send you the video. It's a really great video that was done that I think touches on the fact, that really this is a moment in time, and how we respond to it.
I didn't mean to do that. Sorry.
It's okay. I could talk while you're flipping through the slides.
Okay.
The way that we respond to it, and the way that our students respond to it, as Kara was talking through, just the mental health impacts and the way that it will impact our brain and how we think and how we respond. That also is the same for students who are Kara?
I know. I'm working it out. I got quick
Okay.
fingers and then it got away from me. Yeah.
Okay. In the way that our students are responding to the work that you're doing and thinking about, their next plans. And the reason I included this slide is because as I've participated in webinars and support groups, I jumped on a call a couple of weeks ago. The Crisis Management Institute is doing several weekly support groups for school counselors around the country. And I think that this speaks to the fact that while we're all in one way or another responding to a pandemic, it does not look the same. So yes, we can say we're in the same boat, but the storm isn't the same, depending on where we are. And I think Kara and I, being on the East Coast in states where we're seeing high numbers of the coronavirus, where we're seeing students who are impacted, families who are impacted. We've lost, in my state, we've lost counselors already who have passed away from coronavirus, and schools are trying to respond to that, as well as many parents. But I was on this call with the Crisis Management Institute a couple of weeks ago, and there were counselors from all over the country. And there were two counselors from the Bronx. When a counselor, I want to say it was Iowa, that this one counselor said she didn't know anyone who had coronavirus, didn't know anyone in her family. And then these two counselors from the Bronx came on, and they were talking about the fact that they were working with many students who were now orphaned as a result of the virus. And so we know it looks different. And I'm assuming with all of you on the call today, your experiences are probably very different with this. And we know our perspective is coming from being in places where the virus is very rampant and the impact is really great, but we still believe akin to 9/11, the entire country was impacted by it. So even if the virus might not be as rampant in a community, you've still had to respond to it, and you've been hearing about it, and if you have children, your children have been hearing about it. People who are worried about their parents and grandparents. And so I just think it's good to remember you're going to see students also responding in very different ways as a result of how they perceive where they are in all of this. You want to go to the next slide? So when you think about your seniors who are looking at their post-secondary plans, we know that some of them are reconsidering their plans. I've been on some webinars now with university presidents who are talking about universities who are rethinking their strategies, seeing some pretty interesting incentives to try to encourage students to show up in the fall, whether they're going to be online or face-to-face. It's kind of all over the board. And so the one thing, I'm going to start with what I have at the bottom here. I think when you're working with your students right now, just remember there's not a right or a wrong decision. Really, it's the best decision that your students can make for themselves in this moment. And I know as college advisors and post-secondary planners, one, we want to encourage students not to give up on things that they've been working for their entire educational experience, and we want to encourage them. However, we don't have all the answers. We don't know what's going to happen, and I think we need to be very careful to help them think through their decisions and for them to make the best decision for themselves. So a lot of students who may be thinking about reconsidering their plans, it really is out of necessity. Their financial situation may have changed. Just today, NCAN released a report that the number of FAFSAs being completed compared to a year ago is down 300,000 FAFSA applications at this point in time. That's really concerning. It makes me wonder how many students, what did we average in this group? I think it was almost 39 or 38.5%, that you felt like your seniors were deciding on changing their post-secondary plans. So it is very concerning. It's concerning, especially for our first-gen low-income students. that aren't completing a FAFSA that may then necessitate that they change their plans later in the summer. So our seniors really have to evaluate their priorities based on their own personal experience. Some students might be really concerned about how the pandemic is going to impact their immediate future, and we're hearing that. Other students, just like Kara was talking about from a executive functioning level, they may be really task focused. They may be going through all the details, making sure that they've got everything in line. Some students right now just might be really worried about their friends, their family, the relationship aspect of the virus, and wanting to spend more time with their family and with their friends. Some students may be really concerned about the situation and how it's going to impact their plans. And then other students may not be worried at all. They may actually be excited because they're hearing that some universities are going to offer free tuition for fall semester. We've got juniors now who might be excited because the ACT and SAT is no longer, required for some universities. So the feelings that they have about this and about, the changing deadlines for some students, that might create a lot of anxiety. For others, they might be thrilled because they have a little more time to make a decision, to put a deposit down. You might find that there's some families that really are taking comfort in looking forward to the future. And then you might have some families, I did a webinar for parents in the DMV area a few weeks ago, and I had some parents who said, there is no way I want to pay this much tuition for my child to take the class 2 bedroom doors down from me. Parents who are really concerned about it. So they're all over in their concerns and the way they're looking at this. Also, Kara talked about it, but our seniors may be mourning, the loss of activities this year, the disappointment in rituals and things that they expected to do that they're no longer going to be able to do. And so that could be impacting them. And then I don't want to underscore the fact that this virus is disproportionately affecting our students of color, our immigrant students, poor families. And when we're working with them and we're talking about post-secondary opportunity, we cannot forget this. The messages that they're hearing, the messages I have been saying for quite some time, we have a new marginalized group, and that's the group of people who have any type of underlying medical disorder or medical complication that might put them in a high risk category. Those are not visually known. Many times people don't share that information. However, every time a state or a community reports a death and somehow minimizes it by saying with other health conditions, as if that meant that life had less value, it's created another marginalized group, and I worry about the impact that that's having on students and families. Carrie, you want to switch? So here's just some recommendations, and I'm taking some of this from work that I've done addressing the summer melt, thinking about it in terms of, some people are calling it the COVID melt or the COVID slide. Obviously, we expect this to be summer melt on steroids. How do we work with our students then knowing this? It's different than what we were doing in the past to address summer melt in some ways, but it's also similar in other ways. I think one of the most important things that you can do right now is really to maintain a strong relationship with your students. Focus on their well-being first, check in with them. My husband and I have very different careers. I'm an educator, I'm a counselor, so my whole life it's been pretty much about how people feel and how they're doing. Engineers don't talk about how people feel and how they're doing very often, but I've watched as he's working from home that they start their meetings checking in on each other. I think it's just so important right now with our students to make sure we're asking those questions, not assuming how they're doing, but checking in with them to see how they're functioning, making sure that they're okay, asking about their family, and making that relationship piece be the most important part of any type of post-secondary planning or conversations. asking them, has the pandemic impacted or changed their thoughts about their post-high school plans? And then remembering, and this is something I think is always really important and should be at the forefront of our thoughts around post-secondary advising is, our students don't know what they don't know. And so remembering that this landscape is totally changing. I have spent hours and hours and hours trying to put together resources for counselors that would keep up to date with the changes that were happening, because they've been coming in so quick. And it's still changing. We're still looking at universities that are making decisions about whether they'll be face-to-face in the fall, or whether it's going to be online instruction. That is something that's a big decision piece for many of our students and their families. They want to know, a lot of families want to pay for that college experience because they want them to have the full experience. They want them to be on campus. They want them to be able to participate in activities. So the fact that we don't know that, I think, we need to disclose that. Many universities have not decided yet. I'm sure that you're all aware on this call, but we've seen, deposit deadlines are changing, testing requirements are changing. We've got universities and colleges who are incentivizing students to attend. I assume, unfortunately, with the changing NACAC requirements, we already anticipated that this coming year, we would see more institutions trying to go after students to increase their enrollment numbers. I think now, given that they can do that, and now that universities are so concerned on the higher ed side of it about how many students are going to show up in the fall, that potentially this leads for an interesting and potentially problematic situation for our parents and our students. Now, maybe for some it'll be great because the university is offering them some extended financial awards, but I think we need to realize that even going into fall, maybe it's going to be local institutions that try to incentivize students who are going to originally planning to go out of state. We really don't know what's going to happen here, but I think we need to pay attention to that. And then also, I want to make sure that you recognize, and I'm sure those of you on the call do, but there are ways to make financial aid appeals right now. And even though your FAFSA application is based on your income for last year, you can make appeals based on your current financial situation. So Kara, if you'll switch to the next slide. If you haven't heard about this, I would encourage you all to look at this. It's called Swift Student Form. I think it's formswift.com, but this is an organization right now that's providing free help to students to appeal a financial aid award letter. And I would encourage you just to have this as a resource that you can share with your students. So this is something I just think as you're working with your students to think about, encourage them to stay in close contact with their post-secondary institution, because the changes that are happening at the institution level. And they want to make sure that they can get in and have, those conversations, be looking at their web portal, be checking out the website, getting all the updates as they come in, because they are coming in very regularly. Check in with your students about, financial aid. Given that we're 300,000 less than we were last year, have they completed it? What kind of help do they need with it? You can connect them with their college or university's financial aid office. You can connect them with FSA that's still offering, financial aid assistance, or you can help them online, which I'm sure many of you are already doing. Remind students that they still need to be checking on housing, and if there's a freshman orientation, again, a lot of these things probably aren't known right now, but at least knowing what their institution has in place. Like, if school is going to be face-to-face in the fall, will there be a freshman orientation? I mentioned the tuition bills and the changing dates on that, checking in and making sure when their university or college, if they have shifted the tuition deadlines or not. Health insurance, making sure that they're checking on this, because if schools are in for the fall, all of these things have to be in place, and we'd hate to lose more students because they forgot, or they just weren't going through all the details of what they needed to, and there's not somebody there with them right now helping them to navigate all these steps. And we know in the past these have been huge barriers for students, and these have been reasons that students did not matriculate in the fall after high school graduation. So even for our students who were, you know, academically qualified, been accepted, paid deposits in many cases, these things frequently kept students from actually showing up in the fall. One other thing is, you know, making sure those 8 semester transcripts are sent, addressing digital divide issues. This is actually another reason that we think students may be shifting their plans for the fall, because they're in a home where multiple family members need to be on the computer, whether it's caregivers, parents, multiple kids in the family who need to do school online. And we know we have these huge, you know, digital divide issues in the country. So how many homes do we have that don't have access to Wi-Fi? These things are important, and I think talking to students through that, you know, will they have the access to that? You can go to the next one.
I just did want to add to that. I don't think colleges are thinking about this in the same way that K-12 has already. So a lot of K-12 in what I would call the digital divide had been passing out Wi-Fis and giving one-to-one computers and laptops. And that is something that has happened across this country in some of our most impoverished school districts as well. And so without having the space potentially on campus and knowing that they'd have access to a computer can actually make the determination.
Yeah, I think that that's true. I also think, Kara, can you all hear me?
Yes.
Okay, my computer froze there for a second, so I couldn't tell. I think the fact too that a lot of higher ed students have used places like Starbucks or cafes where they could get, you know, access to Wi-Fi, and many of those are still closed, and they can't go to those places. I know that the K-12 district that I was in, I was always really concerned because we had about 49% of our families who had no access to the internet or a computer in their home. And the school district now has handed out tablets or laptops to every single high school student and middle school student, and now they're working on elementary school students, which is just thrilling to hear when it was such a huge issue in the past. But I agree with you, Kara, we don't know what that's gonna look like or what that's gonna mean for our higher ed students. You can go to the next slide. So we have put together, I have been working on resources for school counselors. I think it's something that all of you, if you are looking for resources, it's separated by topical areas. So resources all related to COVID, whether it's increased bullying and reporting that, crisis intervention, grief and trauma, college access. And so I've tried to put together the most current, up-to-date resources by state level, as well as national level, linking you to, hopefully I tried to tap into any organization that was updating their information daily, so I didn't have to keep updating on the website. But this is a resource for you that you can go in. I'm happy to have you look at that and to share that with others. I want to share another website that I think is just phenomenal. The California School Counseling Association and the Wisconsin School Counseling Association, with over, I believe it now is over 60 specialists and professional counselors, college advisors, put together this website. It is phenomenal. They split it up into mental health, college career, working with special populations, different stakeholders. So if you're a teacher, an administrator, a counselor, I would encourage you to take a look at this website, another just really, really great resource that you can use with your family and students. So I hope that this has been helpful. We tried to anticipate some of the things that we thought you would be the most interested in, but really want to open this up now for any questions that you have that we can try to address for you.
Laura and Kara, thank you. I don't know if you've seen the comments rolling in, but there's a lot of gratitude. I think you've spoken to a lot of people personally, and also the professional experiences they are having. I wanted to call out two things. There was a question about whether this recording, our states, we work with state level folks, if they could get it in the hands of school counselors and college access professionals. And Laura answered that in the chat box and said yes. So we will be putting this recording in our ACAC network SharePoint for y'all to access. And thank you, Kara and Laura, for making that available. Also wanted to point out, I know we shared with you the webinar that Hope Center did on the SWIFT student resource that supports students in navigating the appeal process with individual colleges, financial aid award letters. And a lot of you were able to join that. I saw ACAC represented in a lot of the Q&A on that. ACT is also hosting an informational webinar on SWIFT Student on May 14th, and we will be sure to get that information out to y'all so you can register for that if you haven't had a chance to learn more about that. And I'm seeing a lot of folks who have positive feedback on SWIFT Student as well. Laura, do you have the website you mentioned? I think maybe both the American University one and the other one that you highlighted that you could put in the chat or send to us, and we can get that out to the field.
Yeah, let me grab the AU one and I'll put it in there right now. The other one is in the it's in the text of the PowerPoint. Let me grab. Okay. I'll put it in the chat right now. I'm just grabbing it real quick.
Okay. And the folks on the phone are many of them at state agencies or nonprofit organizations that are serving across the state and have regular interaction with school counselors, with college access professionals. In addition to those resources that you're sharing, are there other recommendations you have to support school counselors, those folks that are working directly with students that our states can take action on?
So one of the things in the resources actually are links to other resources and statewide resources. And that was actually where I spent the bulk of my time, was trying to consolidate useful resources. There's so many that are out there right now. And so if you take a look at the two websites and go in and look at what California and the Wisconsin School Counselor Associations put together, and I think take a look at the AU website, you will see all kinds of resources about, how do school counselors move their practice to online. There are resources for every level, for elementary, middle, and high school, to think about post-secondary planning, college and career readiness. There's been a lot of effort to try to put these resources together, but I don't think that all counselors know about it. So I'm thrilled to have all of these state, representatives on this call who can share it. I think this is a time, everybody is working really hard to try to support their students. And if there's anything we can do to try to support counselors in the field and helping their families so they're not spending, tens of 20s and 30s of hours trying to find the resources, that's what we tried to help. So hopefully you'll find that there and they can use that.
Fantastic, thank you. And you spoke to this a bit, that the pandemic is really impacting our vulnerable populations, perhaps more than others. And all of the folks on the phone are really focused on closing those educational equity and opportunity gaps. So, what are your recommendations of getting accurate information, not only to school counselors, but as we think about the ways we communicate with students and families, perhaps through social media or whatever you recommend? How can we get accurate information into the hands of students and families so that they're making informed decisions about post-secondary plans? What are the best ways to reach families that are experiencing the brunt of this crisis?
So I think probably both Kara and I could speak to that. Do you want to jump in first, Kara, and then I'll jump in?
You can go first. Mhm.
So I think just like when we're in a school building and we're face to face, one of the things we always struggle with is that communication piece. Like, how do we reach everyone? And people have different preferences for, you know, how we can reach out to them and connect with them. So I think a lot of the counselors are trying to think through that. We also have a situation where from state to state and district to district, what's allowed for our counselors to do based on district rules around this. Kara and I early on were actually, or maybe I'll speak for myself, I was shocked to find out that some states have prohibited their counselors from having any contact with their families. Right now, that just wasn't something I expected to hear. And so they're trying to work through other channels to be able to reach parents and students. But I've seen a combination of things, whether it's offering webinars, some counselors are meeting one-on-one and offering time for students, parents to sign up for that individual help. Some, you know, counselors are utilizing email to correspond back and forth. We've had schools for a while that have been using text messaging that now have sort of amplified their text messaging to reach students. Some are using social media that are, you know, comfortable with that, something that their schools allow. But I think we have to be creative. We have to think about like understanding and knowing where our parents are and the best way to reach them. Maybe it's even through other organizations. I know a lot of the FAFSA completion work that I've done is always about like reaching out to the community to know where our parents are and how do we, you know, connect with other organizations that can get information to our parents. But this is new. This is new for all of us. Let's see, I think my last day face-to-face at the university was March 9th. So we're 2 months into this, 8 weeks. We're all trying, you know, to figure out how to do this. And I think we're going to learn. And I think in many ways, our communication will be strengthened as a result of this. I'm thrilled to see that we've actually got places that are addressing the digital divide in very powerful ways. This has been going on for, you know, way too long, that our students have been disadvantaged, that didn't have access. So it's nice to see that some of these things are being put in place, which will help your ability to communicate. And Kara, I'll let you jump in.
So I am the plus and the negative aspect to this. The plus is we've never had so much access to parents before in some way. Also, particularly in those communities where our where they are giving computers and Wi-Fi's and hotspots. That's one thing. However, we have also realized how least tech savvy parents are. So two things about that. One, we have a lot that don't understand what Wi-Fi is still. So I'm giving you the gamut. And particularly if we're talking about our marginalized communities. And then the other aspect is where they really are. And I say this as a parent to 2 young kids, as to most of you who are probably on this call who are trying to work from home and have kids too. Like, there are a lot of parents who want limited school contact. They just can't handle it. It's one more thing. And as much as we're trying to help plan and move forward, it's traumatic for them trying to figure out how to navigate. And so it really asking them what the best course of action for them. We have seen probably the most success in 2 ways. A lot of schools have been able to continue to text using like Remind or something that they had already had in place previously. And obviously the portals that still exist for student records. But a lot of our counselors have had probably the most success with Google Voice. And the rationale behind that is obviously it's a number, right? It's not theirs, it's their cell phone number, but they are able to receive text messages in ways in which they were never able. So as a school counselor, you weren't able to just have a phone out and receive text messages. And I think this is something that might actually stay in place kind of moving forward. So I can tell you that that's definitely been the number one, but I will tell you, parents are only able to also respond at certain hours, and those hours aren't your hours. And so if it's something that you really need to have a conversation about, it is going to take a lot more effort on your part to be able to get that. And so, you know, for the same reason that it's taking a lot longer for get any other thing done, really trying to schedule a time with parents has become it's interesting, right? Immediate access and yet no access all at the same time.
Right. Right, right. Thank you for that. Because our network is awesome, Adrian asked if states have resources for their specific state that are already on the AU website, if Laura would like to those sent to her.
And I
Laura
said yes. No,
So-
I said yes.
And Kara said yes too. Okay,
And I
great.
said
So,
yes
yeah,
too.
if y'all do have resources, please do send that. I think, yep, Laura put her email address there, owen@american.edu. That would be fantastic. Thank you all for stepping up there.
Kara did too. She
Yeah.
gave us her-
There's
Yeah,
Kara.
I
Okay.
gave my work account just so either one's fine. But
Aiva@rowan.edu.
Sorry.
Wonderful.
fine.
Wonderful. Well, Kara and Laura, this has been a wonderful, wonderful conversation. Thank you for your willingness to join us and to really put some context around what our students, families, and we individually are experiencing right now. We're very grateful for your time and wish you all luck. We will see you for session 4 at 3 p.m. Eastern in 45 minutes. So go do some self-care, do something kind for yourself, and we'll see you in a little bit. Thank you all.
Bye-bye.
Bye.
Bye-bye.
Leave meeting, Johnny.